This is a 14-year-old router that I recently got for $9 at the second-hand store. There's a lot of questions you could ask about these, and we will touch on a few. However, the big one I want to answer is, can you use one for gaming? Let's jump in. The year is 2009. The Black Eyed Peas and Lady Gaga are ruling the charts. Modern Warfare 2 is big on Xbox Live. Windows Vista is on our PCs, and Snow Leopard on our Macs. Enter Apple as they release the 4th generation of their Airport Extreme router. Yes, Apple used to make routers. The Airport Extreme 4th generation was a small update bringing antenna improvements to the last major update, which was earlier in the year with the 3rd gen model, bringing simultaneous dual-band 802.11n radios, allowing for 2.4 and 5 GHz networking. It was loved for its simple setup, fast speeds, simple interface, and its easy to set up network storage or printing capabilities, as well as its fantastic stability. But it was disliked for its lack of advanced networking features and lower than average wireless range. Fast forward to 2024 and Wi-Fi has come a long way, and I find this router in the second-hand store for $9. But despite its age, how does it do as a router, or even just as a basic extra access point in the house? What are the possible bottlenecks, and how would we even test them? Well, I don't have a clue, but luckily I've brought in a few people that might.
Hi guys, I'm Owen from the YouTube channel Techwen.
I'm Hamish from Budget Builds. I run the channel Budget Builds Official.
I'm Zach, and I used to work with Tim back in Australia.
Over the years I've experienced or dealt with a lot of the airport sort of line of hardware. The line of products was very user-friendly in terms of the setup process and ease of use. Managing it from outside of Apple devices is a bit of a grey area.
I've known of one in existence, and it just had labels saying "Do not touch" next to a Mac that should have been long since out of commission. I think it was a Power Mac G5, so I think it was being used for file storage.
I think we need a motivational poster for this one, Airport Extreme. It's just sitting there humbly, you know, for all these years. It's just done its task. There's something quite beautiful about that. That's what I've heard a lot about them. I've heard they're quite reliable. They're a good little soldier.
One thing that would be interesting to see, their file sharing system and their AirPlay system. I'd be very interested to see how the wireless connection sort of performance. There's a great application called NAS It will tell you how strong the signal is from where you're standing.
Grand Theft Auto Online would probably be the best one because it's a horrible peer-to-peer mess. And the only problem with testing GTA Online is it's such a non-repeatable experience because up to 16 players, the netcode, it's beautiful. The game was never designed for 32 players. After that, 32-player peer-to-peer, the networking goes crazy. I've seen it literally run at single digits on the Xbox One.
Anything that updates your position rapidly is a good game to test, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, Overwatch obviously is a very demanding game in that regard, especially for an older router.
Something where netcode can influence the game. So CSGO, I don't know if they've fixed it or not, but I know that Assetto Corsa has been criticized for having bad netcode. I think it would be fun to try out because it's such high stakes and it's so fast. You know, your position is updating so rapidly.
Now, we did talk about all sorts of other stuff, but the rest will be in the extended cut on Patreon. For YouTube, we have to keep it short. Now, armed with a couple ideas from my tech comrades, it's time to see what this little Wi-Fi veteran can do. While the airport lacks 10 gigabit Ethernet, its absence won't significantly impact most casual games, so wireless performance will take the spotlight today. Budget cutbacks at Greenham mean we're using the Athlon HP to test. It's the only PC I have right now with a decent Wi-Fi card. I tested a couple of the Wi-Fi dongles around the house with my desktop and they didn't cut it. Bottleneck City. So when the dongle boys couldn't step up to the plate, the HP said, "Don't worry about it, mate." It's anything but a gaming PC with an Athlon and Vega 2. But it should reveal enough about ping and latency to see the video through. For a reference point, we'll pit the airport up against a high-end Asus router. To keep things fair, let's keep the routers across the room from the PC and test them separately. The airport set to dedicated 5 GHz mode, all tests using the 5G network on both for speed, of course. As for range, don't worry, we'll talk about that later. But the question is, how much faster is a download? Yeah, my level of can be with this may reduce substantially as we get to further away locations. We'll start with a simple speed test of the airport against a modern router. It's clear the airport is bottlenecking the connection as the numbers are considerably higher on the modern router. So in theory, it would be twice as fast at downloading games, right? Well, the answer will surprise you. A router can only be as fast as the server that it's downloading from. Downloading Apex Legends on both routers took a very similar amount of time. The new router only won by about 7 minutes. Jumping into games, here's the metrics for each game that we have to work with. Let's start with Overwatch. In-game, in terms of feeling, there's no noticeable difference between the two. They're both about the same. Looking at numbers, ping is very similar, with the airport seeming lower, but this can vary match to match, so it's about the same. There is a slightly lower minimum on the modern router. Interpolation delay, or INT for short, is the delay to smooth player movements, and typically this should be around 50 to 60 milliseconds, no more. Less is better, obviously. We do see some difference here, but mostly the same. The airport does show one quite large spike up to 71 at one point, but otherwise it's fine. Looking at the numbers all together, you can see the game performs very similarly on both routers. Put it into perspective though, and you can see that they're actually very close. Gaming experience wise, they feel the same, although I'm not exactly a competitive Overwatch player, so it's hard to say. The next two games the HP really doesn't like running, so you could say there's going to be a network performance bottleneck from its struggling CPU. But since we're using the same PC on both routers, we should be able to get some point of comparison here. Apex Legends was a hard one to compare because each round is so different. So we'll look at the data and try our best to compare. The first test on the airport was all over the place, with 2 freezes and 2 disconnects and rejoins. Looking at packet loss, there are plenty of incidents here as well. Packet loss is when data packets don't reach their destination, causing lag. More of those means more stutter and less accuracy. A packet loss is typically worse than just a high ping because it means the data is not getting to the server at all. Our next round was more consistent with only one disconnect and a few packet loss incidents at the start, showing that the airport can handle a round of this game. On the modern router, things were all over the place, so it's hard to get a baseline reading. There were plenty of packet loss incidents here as well, so the modern router wasn't exempt. However, I reckon you could put this down to the HP just being too bottlenecked by its CPU. Put the data side by side and you can see that it's not that easy to compare. But let's compare the data from the two most consistent rounds. Here it's clear that the modern router pulls ahead with less spikes and a more consistent ping overall. Over all the testing, there was only one disconnect and dropout, while the airport had more than a few. So for Apex Legends at least, a modern router does do a fair bit better. Counter-Strike is another game that the HP really struggles with, but luckily we did get some data. It seems that the airport is lower, but the modern router doesn't have the same random spikes. The averages end up about the same, but there are more packet loss incidents on the airport. Putting the data into perspective with a higher scope shows that for CS2, an older router might impact things, but not by a huge amount. Once again, I'm not a competitive CSGO player, so I'm hoping that those who do play and those who do understand how much ping affects things can at least get some idea from this. In Assetto Corsa, we tested the same two servers with the airport and the modern router. The results did show that the modern router is certainly more stable, but while these charts look dramatic, when you actually get into the game, the ping is only a few milliseconds difference between the two. The airport didn't show any serious stutter or positioning problems, they both played fine. And when you zoom out of scope on the graphs here, you can actually see how the gameplay experience across the two is much the same. GTA 5 is a really hard game to test, as Hamish from Budget Build said, because it's so unrepeatable. The lobby is constantly changing in player number, and the netcode is actually really stable when the player number is low. However, we did get some idea by trying my best to just wreak havoc on GTA Online and have a look at the performance. Now, we did have building dropout and sort of area dropout on both routers, but that's more to do with the HP's CPU. There wasn't really a clear winner here. I would say, just from playing a fair bit, that the modern router was slightly more stable perhaps, but it's hard to say. I'll show you some footage of both and I'll let you make up your mind. So jumping into the range test here, the way we're going to do it is we're using this fantastic application called INSSIDER. It's going to give us signal strength and it's going to give it to us in minus dB, right? What's really cool about it though is that it gives it to us in real time, and we're going to test the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz network of the modern router, and then we're going to compare them to the 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz networks of the Airport Extreme. As you can see, I've put the Airport Extreme next to the other router for a fair comparison, and go from there. So let's jump right in. So once again, in the living room, we're looking at 38, 30, minus 38. We're looking at minus 36, minus 32, and we're looking at about minus 33 on the core. So about a little bit better, but not by a massive amount. So jumping into our second location, the kitchen, having a look at 2.4 gigahertz spectrum. Very similar on both of these, although we are only, one room away. We're getting about minus 50 on the Airport Extreme, minus 50 on the modern router. Now we take a look at 5 gigahertz signals. Definitely gets a bit more interesting. So the 5 gigahertz network on the Airport Extreme, comparing that, we can see that is fluctuating a little bit there. For a brief moment it seemed that mine was faster, but it's not. The Airport Extreme gets about minus 67. The ROF there is getting minus 60, so that's the modern router. They have these brief moments there where they jostle, but the Airport Extreme at its worst is at minus 73, and ROF, as you can see, sitting at minus 62. So a clear winner with only just a room away. Okay, now looking at our third location, the study. In here, we've got on Tim's Wi-Fi network, we've got a signal of minus 50 on the core, minus 50 as well. So very similar signal strength on this location. Got Tim's Wi-Fi network at minus 50, the core at minus 52. They sort of trade places in terms of strength. In fact, Tim's is, it looked like it was stronger for a moment there, but it's not. Williams' router is slightly better at minus 52. Getting into 5 gigahertz, we're looking at minus 50 on all three in this location. So we're looking at about the same in here on 5 gigahertz. Alrighty, we're here in our next location. Let's start off with our 2.4s. Oops. 5 gigahertz is still quite strong on the modern router, okay, but then on the Airport we're really low out here. We're really low in our next location. So we're down here in the basement now in our last location, taking a look at NSSIDER. It's not good news for any router. The two of them are just jostling. The Airport Extreme appeared to do well briefly and better than the modern router, but now that we've actually connected to the modern router, it's hard to say, it's all over the place. In terms of 5 gigahertz, looking at minus 76, minus 82 on one network there, and the Airport is not great at all. That's down to 89, so really not great. The next thing I want to test is actually one of the big selling points of these Airport Extreme routers. Now, we take for granted these days having the ability to host a drive, but back then Airport made it really easy. They touted this ability to share a hard drive. It was in fact one of the major selling points of these routers. You could very easily hook up a drive, manage it from the Airport utility, and even, it's defunct now, but you could access the drive using MobileMe, now iCloud. The setup instructions for it are still on the Apple website. pretty easy to do, though there is a caveat here, as you can see. You have to either pick from HFS Plus, the macOS format, or FAT32. And as far as Windows file formatting goes, FAT32 is one of the worst to work with. Why is that? Well, you can only have files up to 4 gigs, which means if you've ripped a bunch of movies like me, DVDs or Blu-rays, and you haven't compressed them yet, those files are over 4 gigs, and thus you can't have them on a FAT32 volume. It also means that newer games that have components that are bigger than 4 gigs are not going to be able to be stored. The system does support HFS, and I thought maybe it kind of has some sort of translation layer where it can translate the HFS for Windows. However, Copilot reckons it can't. I'm going to trust that. Maybe we look into it more later. Perhaps someone who's watching knows some secret way. Here's the plan. We're going to start with a FAT32 volume, and we're going to load some games onto it, or load a game onto it, do a file transfer over LAN, and then do a file transfer wirelessly. We're then going to do it again, but this time format the drive to HFS Plus. This will mean we can only use it with a Mac. We'll do a speed test, we'll load a Mac Steam game, we'll do a couple movies streaming off the disc, a couple of my Blu-ray rips or DVD rips, just to see if there is the bandwidth there for that. We'll do a file transfer and then a file transfer wirelessly. So without further ado,
okay, let's go.
we're playing Left 4 Dead over the network here. It is all coming off the Airport Extreme and the SSD hooked up to it, which I think is pretty cool. Okay, now we are going to unplug the Ethernet and do a file transfer test wirelessly. No problems at all. That means we can move on to HFS, which hopefully will be a lot more stable, and we can do some more fun tests because we're not limited by that 4 gig file size. That plays absolutely fine. Those are the ones that really hurt.
Can you see
A name on that list, Laura! Maybe you'd sneak into the top 10. There's just no room for you on the top 5. Sorry. If you just wanted like a cheap box that you can hook up to your network and have, you know, some network storage attached, not only does this device allow you to have one hard drive hooked up, you can have, if you hook up a hub, you can have more than one. So it's an interesting little network attached storage device. It's quite capable in its Mac mode. That's the funny thing though. In the FAT32 mode, it is an absolute pain. But in the HFS mode, yeah, not super fast, about 20 megabits per second, but I can stream a movie off it, I can copy a movie onto it, off it, I can stream Blu-rays, I can stream DVDs. Fantastic. Fantastic. And outside, they are rebuilding the road. I might actually have to get the old Sony IC recorder here, hook it up to the lav mic, and record down the street or something. Out there, they're just making a whole lot of noise. To wrap up, I thought I'd share a story that led me to a good metaphor for this router. In Sweden, to make friends, I started hosting fortnightly Mario Kart evenings at our place. I invited William and his family, and a few other people I've met from around town, like the local baristas from my favourite coffee shop. On the most recent Mario Kart evening, I found myself feeling a bit underappreciated. I was running around making dinner, serving drinks, and cleaning up while everyone else was having fun playing Mario Kart. After tidying up, I went into my room feeling a little sad. But then William came in and shared some wonderful advice. He said that hosting a gathering is hard because the host's job is not to have fun like everyone else or to be noticed, but to make sure that other people are enjoying themselves. If the host does a really good job, it's sometimes hard to even notice that they're doing it. Everything just sort of comes together. The food comes out on time, you always have a beverage, and your glass is always full. If the host is really good, you can just enjoy yourself and not notice any of these little things. Whereas if the host does a bad job, you really notice. You sit there hungry, asking where the food is, where the drinks are, and you wonder why you haven't been introduced to anybody. You notice a bad host, but you don't always notice a good host. And it made me think that a good router is like a good host. When a router does its job really well, you rarely notice it at all. You just use the internet and enjoy yourself, forgetting that it exists and that it's hosting your network, and thus your experience. But if you notice the router, if you're using the internet and thinking about the router, wondering why it's unstable, why the video is freezing, maybe questioning if you're too far away or if you need to reset it again, then the router has failed. You really shouldn't have to think about a router when it's doing its job right. After a month with the Airport Extreme, I can confidently say you can absolutely game on one of these and forget that you're using a 14-year-old router. For high-impact fast games, maybe those extra milliseconds will count and a newer router might help, but for casual gaming, it's absolutely fantastic. The one time I would say that you do notice the host is with range. I bought it to help strengthen the Wi-Fi signal in my room, and it's great for that. But when I leave my room, I do begin to notice. You're on FaceTime in the kitchen and the video's dropping out, and you find yourself going, I'm connected to the airport, that's why. Sorry, give me a second. But in terms of its merit as a good host, I must remark on its stability. Prior to testing, people did mention the stability, but I didn't quite realize just how stable it is. In the month that I used it, it didn't crash once. I never needed to reset it or think about it. It just sat there and did its job. Whereas William's router did actually need a reset at one point this month. So if you're in the market for another access point in your house, or want to improve the Wi-Fi in a room, the Airport is a really cheap and stable router. The NAS function is a great bonus. It's very easy to put a couple of Blu-ray or DVD rips on it and have them accessible from any computer on the network. For $10, when you consider the stability and how well it fits in, it's a fantastic buy for the money. The vision of Greenham Gaming has always been encouraging us to see the value in underappreciated, underpowered, and forgotten tech. I hope this video encourages you to give old tech like these airport routers another chance, because they still have a lot of love to give. And one more router in your house is one less router in landfill, after all. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I thank you for watching, and I wish you a good night. Almost lost it there. Okay. So, definitely wish I did the benchmarks on William's PC.
Oops, I forgot. I forgot.
It's okay, because the HP is here.
Okay.